I was 3 minutes from closing the biggest contract of my life when my father kicked the glass door of my boardroom open hard enough to rattle the city skyline framed behind it. He had a folder in his hand, manila, dog-eared, the kind he'd carried to every meeting since 1986, and he slapped it down on the polished table between me and the four executives from the development consortium I'd spent 11 months courting. The sound cracked through the room like a rifle going off over Lake Ontario. "You're going to make your brother managing partner of this firm," he said. Not a question. He never asked for anything in his life. Effective today. "Oh, I'll have the man who owns this building shut you down by Friday." I remember the way the youngest exec, a sharp woman from the consortium named Priya, set her pen down very slowly, the way you do around a dog that might be rabid. I remember my mother appearing in the doorway behind him with that little folded arm smile she'd been wearing my whole life. The one that said, "Go on, sweetheart, embarrass yourself." And I remember my brother hanging back near the elevators in a suit that didn't fit him anymore, staring at the carpet like a kid who'd been dragged to the principal's office. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I'd learned a long time ago that the calmer I got, the more it terrified him, because calm was the one thing he'd never been able to take away from me. "Go ahead," I said. "Call him." My father blinked. "The owner of this building," I said. "You've clearly got his number since you're so sure of yourself. Call him, put it on speaker. I'd love for my clients to hear it." I slid my phone across the table toward him, screen up. "Let me back up, because none of this lands right unless you understand how I got to that boardroom and how long I'd been waiting for somebody in my family to make exactly this mistake. I grew up in a brick semi in Scarborough, the middle kid and the only girl between two brothers who could do no wrong. My father came over from the old country with $11 and a trade, and he built a small contracting business pouring foundations across the East End through the 70s and 80s. He was proud of it, the way a man is proud of the only thing he's ever made, which is to say he could not separate his worth from it, and so anyone who threatened it threatened him. He decided early on which of his children would inherit. It was my older brother, who was charming and tall and useless. By the time my brother was 19, he dropped out of 2 programs at 2 different colleges. By the time he was 25, he'd run a landscaping company into the ground and convinced my father it was the economy's fault. My younger brother got out clean, moved to Calgary, married a nurse, calls me on my birthday and on nobody else's behalf, which is the most I've ever asked of anyone in that family. I was the strange one. I drew buildings. I'd sit at the kitchen table with graph paper and sketch out the houses I'd put up someday. And my father would glance over my shoulder and say, "That's a nice little hobby," in the tone you'd use for a kid finger painting. When I got into the architecture and structural design program at university on a scholarship, paying my own way with 2 jobs, my mother told the relatives I was taking some art classes. When I graduated near the top of my class, she didn't come. She had a hair appointment. I'm not being cruel. She actually had a hair appointment. And she actually chose it, and she actually told me so on the phone like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. The break came when I was 28. My father called me into the living room, a summons, always a summons, and told me my brother was starting a consulting firm and needed startup capital, $40,000. He wanted me to co-sign a line of credit and put my condo up as collateral because I had the credit and my brother by then had none. I said no. You'd think I'd announced I was joining a cult. My mother cried. My father stood up so fast, his chair tipped over, and he said the thing I've turned over in my mind 1,000 winters since. "After everything this family did for you, this is who you are. You want to play businesswoman? Fine. Don't come back here when it falls apart. We're done with you." So they were done with me. They meant it. No calls, no Christmas, no acknowledgement when I emailed to say I'd started my own firm out of a rented desk in a co-working space off King West with 1 laptop and a folding chair. My brother's consulting firm, the one my $40,000 was supposed to launch, never opened. He'd spent the planning money my parents did give him on a leased Audi. Nobody in that family ever connected those 2 facts. They just quietly decided it was still somehow my fault. I want to be honest about the years that followed, because the version where I rose like a phoenix is a lie, and you all can smell a lie. There were months I lived on instant noodles and the free coffee in the co working lounge. There was a winter I slept on an air mattress in the office because I'd given up my apartment to make payroll for the one employee I'd hired, a junior drafter named Theo who believed in me before there was any reason to. There was a night on the Gardener, stuck in sleet, where I cried so hard I had to pull onto the shoulder because I genuinely could not see, and I thought, in the worst hour of it, maybe my father was right. But here's what nobody in my family understood about me, because they never bothered to look. I am not charming. I am not tall. I am not the one anybody bets on. I am, however, extremely difficult to get rid of. I took the jobs nobody wanted, retrofits on heritage buildings downtown that other firms wouldn't touch, because the math was ugly and the liability was uglier. I learned to love a problem that made everyone else flinch. By 31, I had 9 employees. By 33, I had a real office in a tower on Bay Street, a reputation for bringing impossible projects in on budget, and a name that meant something in rooms I'd once not been allowed into. I built it the way my father built his foundations, slow, square, and so deep underground that you'd have to take down the whole building to find the bottom of it, and then I won the bid. The consortium was redeveloping a stretch of the waterfront, a mixed-use tower, residential over retail, the kind of project that gets written up in the Globe and reshapes a skyline for 50 years. They'd shortlisted 4 firms. 3 of them were giants with offices in 5 cities. The 4th was mine. We got it because I'd spent a year understanding their actual problem instead of selling them my reputation, and because the woman with the pen, Tria, had walked our retrofit sites herself and seen that I do what I say I'll do. Which brings us back to the boardroom, and my father, and the manila folder, and the phone I just slid across the table. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they'd opted out of my life entirely, was how they'd found their leverage. My brother's wife. I'd met her exactly twice. She ran a small marketing and reputation management agency, the kind that promises to make problems disappear online, and in the 3 weeks before that boardroom, she'd quietly tried to make me disappear. It started with reviews, fake ones scattered across every site that would host them, all in that uncanny same voice, missed deadlines, cost overruns, a structural failure that never happened on a project that didn't exist. Then a blog post dressed up as journalism that asked whether my firm was really qualified for a project this size. Then it metastasized into a couple of industry forums in a LinkedIn whisper campaign, timed, and this is the part that told me exactly who was behind it. Timed to the week the consortium was finalizing the contract. It was clever. I'll give her that. She understood how outrage moves online better than anyone I'd ever come up against, and she knew that the truth is slow and a lie is fast, and that if she could just make me look shaky for 10 days, the consortium might get cold feet. She nearly pulled it off. There was a 48-hour stretch where Priya stopped returning my emails and I lay awake, doing math on what it would cost me to lay off half my staff. But she made one mistake, the same mistake my whole family had always made about me. She assumed that because I was quiet, I wasn't paying attention. I'd been documenting everything for 3 weeks. I'd had my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Dominique, who I'd put on retainer 2 years earlier, precisely because I trust very few people and prepare for all of them. I'd had Dominique pull the metadata, trace the review accounts, and draft a defamation claim that was sitting in a sealed envelope in my desk drawer with my brother's wife's name on it. I'd also, that very morning, send the consortium a complete dossier, the fabricated timeline of the smear, the IP traces, the originating accounts, and a calm 1-page note explaining that a family member was attempting to extort a stake in my firm and that I wanted them to have the full picture before they signed anything. Priya had emailed back 4 words. Thank you. We're signing. So when my father walked into my boardroom and threatened me, he was holding a knife he didn't know I'd already pulled out of his hands. Call him, I said again. My mother spoke before he could. Don't be dramatic, she said to me, with that smile. Your father is offering you a way out. The building's owner is a friend of his from the trade. One word and your lease is gone. You should be grateful he's giving you a chance to keep some role here. She said some role the way you'd offer a child the smallest cookie on the plate. Your brother has the leadership this firm needs to grow. You've done well for a little while, but you're not built to run something this size. A man needs to be at the head of something this important. You know that. Deep down, you've always known that. And there it was, the whole architecture of my childhood in 3 sentences, dropped onto a boardroom table in front of the people whose respect I'd spent a year earning. My brother finally spoke up from the back. It's not personal, sis. He couldn't even look at me. Dad and I have a plan. We bring in some real management, we scale this thing, everybody wins. You'd still be like head designer or whatever. We're not pushing you out. He'd remortgage something to say that. I could hear it in his voice. The desperation of a man who'd already spent money he didn't have on a future he assumed was coming. I'd find out later exactly how much. My father picked up my phone. He scrolled, found the contact he wanted, the building's owner, whose name he clearly had, a developer named Mr. Caron, who held the tower, and my father believed held my survival in his hand. He hit call. He hit speaker. He set the phone down in the middle of the table with the smug, heavy satisfaction of a man laying down a winning card, and the line rang twice, and a warm, gravelly voice filled the room. Caron. Mr. Caron, my father said, sitting up straight, performing for my clients. We spoke last week. I'm in the building. I'm with my daughter. There's a situation with the tenant on the 19th floor, the design firm. The leadership is changing. I wanted to confirm with you directly that the lease will be honored under the proper management. Man to man. There was a pause on the line, a long one. I watched my father's certainty hold, then waver, then begin to crack at the edges like ice in April. I'm sorry, Mr. Caron said slowly. Who am I speaking to? My father said his name. And you're telling me, Mr. Caron, Karen said, that you want to discuss the lease for the 19th floor. That's right, with me. That's right, man to man. I heard him chuckle. It wasn't a kind chuckle. It was the chuckle of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a phone to ring. That's interesting, mister, Karen said, because I sold that building 8 months ago, to the firm on the 19th floor, to her. A pause, and I swear I heard him smile. Whoever you are, sir, you're standing in a building that your daughter owns. She's not my tenant, she's my friend. And I've been waiting for this call since the day she told me her family might come crawling back the minute she made something of herself. I will remember the silence in that room for the rest of my life. Let me explain the part Mr. Caron skipped because he was being gracious. 2 years before, when the tower's previous owner was about to sell to a numbered company that planned to gut it and triple the rents, I'd gone to Mr. Vises Caron, a retired developer I'd done a heritage retrofit for, a man who'd become something like the father I didn't have, and I told him I wanted to buy the building. He'd laughed at me kindly, the way you laugh at someone reaching too high, and then he'd looked at my numbers and stopped laughing. He partnered the financing. I put up everything I had, leveraged the firm's value, signed papers that made my stomach turn, and 8 months before that boardroom, I'd bought him out. The building was mine. Flea and as clear as a thing that size ever gets. I owned the floor my father was standing on. I owned the elevator he'd come up in. I owned the glass door he'd kicked open. My father stared at the phone like it had bitten him. That can't be right, he said. You can't own a building. You don't have that kind of. He stopped, because of course I didn't have that kind of money. In his version of me, the version frozen in time at 28, asking for a loan he was sure I'd default on. He had never once updated the file. Hang up the phone, Dad, I said quietly. You're embarrassing yourself in front of my clients. And they're not my clients anymore, by the way. I looked at Priya. We signed an hour ago. She gave me the smallest nod. I'd love to tell you that's where it ended, that they slunk out and I went back to my life. But I'd been waiting for this for 13 years, and I had a few things to say, and for once in my life there was nobody in the room with the standing to stop me. I stood up. I came around the table. My father actually stepped back, and that small involuntary flinch from the man who tipped a chair to loom over me at 28. That did something to the knot I'd carried in my chest since I was a kid drawing houses on graph paper. You said don't come back when it falls apart, I said. I didn't. It didn't fall apart and I didn't come back. You came here, to my building, to my firm, to take what I built with the $40,000 I wouldn't give you, because you've spent your whole life convinced that the only way a thing has value is if a man's name is on it. I looked at my brother. You failed at everything you were handed and they called it bad luck. I succeeded everything I was denied and they called it a hobby. You want to know the difference between us? It was never talent, it was that you always had somewhere soft to land and I never did, and so I learned how to land on concrete. My mother had stopped smiling. You want 60% of nothing, I said, because that's what you think this is, nothing. A little firm, a little woman, a little hobby that got out of hand. You marched in here so sure that one phone call would put me back in my place that you never once stopped to wonder whether I'd spent 13 years climbing out of it. I turned to my brother's wife. She wasn't there, she'd been too smart to come, but I said it to him to carry home. Tell your wife the reviews were a nice touch. Tell her my lawyer enjoyed the metadata. There's an envelope with her name on it in my desk. And whether it gets filed is the only decision in this room that any of you still get to make. She has until Monday to take every word of it down and send me a signed retraction, or she'll be explaining defamation to a judge while the consortium's lawyers watch, because they have the whole file too. My father found his voice. It came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. We're your family. No, I said. You were my landlords, emotionally. You collected rent on my guilt for 13 years and you never once fixed the heat. I almost laughed at my own metaphor. Occupational hazard. I'm not signing anything over to my brother. I'm not giving him a title or a desk or a dollar. And the next time you want to threaten someone with the man who owns the building, you should find out who that is first. I walked to the boardroom phone on the wall and pressed the button for the front desk. Marguerite, I said. Could you send security up to 19? I have 3 guests who are leaving. The thing I hadn't planned for, the thing that surprised me, was what happened to my brother on the way out. The security guard, a soft-spoken giant named Wesley who'd worked the building since before I owned it, came up with a colleague and waited by the elevator while my parents gathered themselves. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother said something about ungratefulness that I genuinely didn't hear, because I'd finally, after 13 years, stopped listening to her. But my brother lingered, and as Wesley held the elevator, my brother turned to me with an expression I'd never seen on him. Not the easy charm, not the borrowed confidence, but raw fear. Sis, he said, very low. I remortgaged the house, Mum and Dad's house. They co-signed. I told everybody the partnership was a sure thing. I've got a lease on a place downtown for the new offices. His voice broke. I owe a lot. If this doesn't happen, the bank's going to. And I understood then the whole shape of it. They hadn't come to my boardroom out of greed alone. They'd come because they'd already spent the future they were so sure they could take from me. My father had let his golden boy bet the family home on the assumption that one phone call would bring his stubborn daughter to heel, the way it always had. They hadn't been threatening me from a position of strength. They'd been drowning, and they'd reached for me, and they'd done it with a fist instead of an open hand, because that was the only way the men in my family had ever known how to reach for anything. For 1 second, and I want to be truthful with you, because you've come this far with me, for 1 second the old reflex fired. The one that says fix it, you have the money now. You could make this all go away and finally be the daughter who saved them. 13 years of conditioning doesn't evaporate because you win one argument. I felt the check practically writing itself. And then I thought about the air mattress, and the noodles, and the night on the gardener in the sleet, I thought about the $40,000 I wouldn't give him, and how that refusal, the one they'd never forgiven, was the only reason I was standing in a building I owned. I thought about every woman who'd ever been told she was good for a little while, but not built to run the important thing. And I thought about my mother, somewhere behind me, who'd skipped my graduation for a hair appointment and would skip my funeral too if the timing was bad. You made a bad bet, I told my brother, not cruelly, just true. You bet that I was still the person they decided I was at 28. I'm not. I haven't been for a long time. You all just never looked. I stepped back. The house isn't my problem. You should call the bank before Monday. And you should tell your wife about the envelope. The elevator doors closed on the three of them, and I stood there in the floor that I owned, in the firm that I built, and I waited to feel triumphant. I didn't, really. Not the way I'd imagined I would on all those nights. What I felt was quieter than that, and stranger, and better. I felt finished. A door that had been banging in the wind my entire life had finally clicked shut, and the house went still. Priya was still in the boardroom. She'd watched the whole thing without moving. When I came back in, she stood, gathered her bag, and on her way out, she paused beside me and said, "My father didn't think I should do engineering either." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She squeezed my arm once and left, and I sat down in my own boardroom in my own building and I breathed. The fallout came the way fallout does, slowly and then all at once. My brother's wife took the reviews down by Sunday night and sent a retraction so groveling I almost felt sorry for her, almost. I never filed the claim. There's a kind of mercy that costs you nothing and means everything. And there's a kind that costs you your spine. And I've learned to tell them apart. The retraction was enough. I kept the envelope, though. I keep it still in the same drawer. Not as a threat, as a reminder of the version of me they thought they were dealing with and how badly they misjudged her. The bank did take the house. There was nothing I could have done about it that wouldn't have undone me. And I made my peace with that on the gardener a long time before it happened. My parents moved into a rental in the East End, not far from where I grew up. And my mother tells the relatives I abandoned them in their hour of need. I've stopped trying to correct the record. The relatives who matter know. The ones who believe her were never going to call me back anyway. My younger brother flew in from Calgary last month. We had dinner down, the two of us, and he raised a glass and said, "You know they're telling everyone you stole the building from Dad's friend." And we laughed, the real kind. The kind that comes up from somewhere old and sore and finally healing. And he said more quietly, "I'm proud of you. For what it's worth, I should have said it years ago. It was worth a great deal. I didn't tell him how much because I'm still not charming, and saying it would have ruined the moment. People ask me when this story comes up, and it comes up in this industry, the woman who owns the Dow she works in, they ask if I regret not helping my family when I had the means. As though means create obligation, as though the fact that I finally had the $40,000 1,000 times over meant I owed it to the people who'd cast me out for refusing it the first time. Here's what I tell them. I tell them I'm not the keeper of the family I was born into. I'm the architect of the one I'm building. And the first principle of any good structure, the thing they teach you before anything else, is that you cannot build something that lasts on a foundation that was only ever designed to bear someone else's weight. I drew houses on graph paper at that kitchen table because I wanted more than anything to make a place where I belonged. It took me 30-some years to understand that I was never going to find it inside the walls they'd built. I had to pour my own foundation, square and slow and so deep underground that nobody, not my father, not my mother, not one slammed manila folder or one smug little smile, could ever take it down to find the bottom of me. I still have the graph paper sketches somewhere in a box. The little houses, the crooked roof lines of a kid who didn't know yet how impossible everyone would tell her it was. I built every single one of them. And then I bought the building they're standing in. The thing I keep coming back to on the quiet drives home along the lake is that nothing in that boardroom happened by accident. My father didn't lose because the universe finally turned in my favor. He lost because of choices, stacked up over 13 years the way I stack load against load when I design a building. He chose to bet the family home on a son who'd never finished anything. He chose to threaten me instead of asking me. He chose to walk into a room without ever once checking who owned the floor beneath his feet. Every one of those choices was a beam he laid himself, and the whole structure came down on the people who built it. That's not fate. That's just what carelessness does when you give it enough time. And I won, if you want to call it winning, for reasons just as plain. When I was 28 and broke, I said no to co-signing that loan because it was wrong, not because it was smart. I didn't have the wisdom yet to see how it would protect me. That came later, but the refusal to put my name on something dishonest, to let myself be used. That decency was the first brick. People underestimate how much of a life gets built on simply not doing the cheap thing when the cheap thing is right there. The smart part came slower, and I had to earn it. Learning to read a contract 3 times, learning to keep a lawyer on retainer before I thought I needed one, learning to document a smear instead of crying over it. Sense like that isn't something you're born with. You collect it on the bad nights, the ones where you got it wrong and swore you'd never get it wrong the same way twice. But honesty and a clear head would have meant nothing without the part that almost broke me. The noodles, the air mattress, the night on the gardener in the sleet when I nearly believed him. Anyone can be principled and clever for a season. Doing it through 13 winters when no one's clapping, when your own mother skips your graduation. That takes a kind of stubbornness that looks like madness right up until the day it looks like wisdom. So if there's anything in my story worth carrying out of it, it's this. Be the person who won't sign the dishonest thing even when you're desperate. Get smarter every single year, especially from your worst mistakes. And when the cold comes, and it always comes, learn to land on concrete and keep building. Sloane didn't beat her family. Sloane just outlasted, outthought, and outdescended them. One ordinary day at a time, until the building was hers.